All right. Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining Visual Sound this morning. Today's topic is Google tips and tricks, tips that you may have forgotten about, or some fun, interesting tidbits that Corey is going to share with us this morning using Google. My name is Andy Brown. I'm a Visual Sound account manager on the education team. So again, I want to thank all of you for joining. Now, after today's call, Corey will be sharing some resources with everyone. So if you could please, in the chat, enter your email address. That is the only way that we will be able to communicate with you after the call. So if you could, in the chat, add your email address, that would be much appreciated. And as Corey had mentioned, today's call is recorded and will be available after the call to watch again. So with that, I will turn it over to Corey to go over Google tips that you forgot about.
All right, good morning, everyone. So, like Andy said, today's session is called Google Tips You Forget About. And I will be very honest, I sometimes forget about these as well, which is why 3 minutes ago I was adding one final slide to the presentation as I remembered something at the last minute I wanted to share. So before we get started, as Andy mentioned, I am a Google for Education certified innovator and a Google for Education certified trainer. If you are interested in any of the Google certification programs, they did just post on social media yesterday that all of the Google Innovator Academies have been canceled for 2020 into 2021 as of right now, but they are planning a virtual academy. So it will be interesting to have the first cohort virtually. If you are interested in that, I can talk to you more during office hours about the different innovator programs and how to get involved with them. So Google has so many different features and so many different functions that a lot of times we totally even forget about them. I am not going to be talking about any of the add-ons, extensions, or third parties today. Everything I am discussing is directly from Google. So the first thing I want to show you is my favorite feature, and that is closed captioning. So when you are on the bottom of your slideshow, you'll see a menu that pops up, and there's an option that says captioning. It is English only, but when you turn on the closed captioning, as you can see in the video, it is going to start saying everything that I am saying. It uses the same technology as voice to text on your cell phone. So it's really great if you have some students that are hard of hearing, or if you're in a big auditorium and you don't even know who's going to be in your audience, turn on that closed captioning when you start presenting, and everyone will be able to read as you type. Now, there is also a function on Google Meet for closed captioning, but that has to be turned on by the individual, not by the presenter. You'll also notice it spelt the word meet wrong, so it is not perfect, but it is pretty cool. Now, the other thing while we're in Google Slides that I want to show you is the presenter mode. If you haven't tried presenter mode before, it is a lot of interesting stuff. So to get to presenter mode, there's two different ways to do it. Way number one is to use the down arrow next to the word present before you start your slideshow. Way number two is also on that bottom menu. You can see right here it says Q&A and notes. Both of those are the presenter tools. That is your audience tool and your speaker notes. So if I come over here and click Q&A, you'll see that it actually minimized my presentation and opened a second window. So I do recommend only using this if you have two screens, or if you are, for example, presenting on a Google Meet like I am, you can have it only share the presentation slideshow and not your entire window. I have the entire window right now just so you can see the difference. Now, what's really nice about this is in the audience tools, you have this Q&A. So you would just click Start New. And right now it says accepting questions from Visual Sound. But if I was presenting this at a conference or I was obviously on Meet, I can come here and change that to anyone. You'll also notice that it says Ask a Question, and it gives you a link on the top of your presentation. Anyone can go into that link and post a question. This is really good for these type of webinars because sometimes the questions get lost in the chat box. But if you were doing it like this, your audience has a link. They can go to that link, and it's going to just make it very easy for them to ask their questions. And I am on my phone right now going to that same link to set up a sample one, just in case nobody in here is asking a question. So I am going to open up that website. It says ask a question. And this is what's really cool about it. So when I click submit the question, you will see over here in my audience tools, the question came up. I just wrote demo question on my phone. But if I was to click the present option on that question, it now changes my slideshow and puts the question very large in real time. So this way my entire audience can see what the question is that I'm answering. As if you have attended any of my previous webinars, I haven't been using this. And what I do is I read the question out loud from the chat box before answering it. So that way, if you go back to watch the recording and you obviously don't have the chat function in the recording, you're able to know what question I'm answering rather than me just seem like I'm talking randomly. So then when you're done reading the question out loud, you click hide and it just goes back to your presentation. So I'm going to maximize the presentation again. So now, as I said, it is better if you have two screens. So if you're in your classroom and you have a smart board or a TV screen or however you present a projector, you are able in your computer to change the mode of presentation from mirroring, which means your computer and your presentation are on the same screen, to extend, which kind of virtually turns it into two separate monitors. So that's how this would work in your classroom. Obviously, if we're doing this as a presentation like we are right now, what I would recommend is in Google Meet, you just click share window instead of share screen. And this way only your presentation is shared and you on your personal computer can see both windows. So now the next tip I'm going to talk about is Google Docs, and that is table of contents and all of this other stuff. And I just realized I left that link up there. So I'm going to turn off that audience question since we're not using that anyway. And that takes the bar off the top because now you can't submit questions. So in Google Docs, if you come up here in the toolbar, it normally says normal text. But if you change this to a heading, it will actually create a table of contents that you can use to go between different sections of the document. If you are making a huge resource for your students, or if you are an administrator and you're making a lot of stuff for your teachers, you can use that table of contents to make it interactive so they can quickly get from part 1 to part 2 without having to scroll all the way through. My visual sound reference right now, the bit.ly, is currently up to 9 pages of resources. So if you were going to slowly type 9 pages of resources or scroll through 9 pages of resources, it would take you a while to find what you want. But if you were to use the table of contents, you could easily get from the Microsoft references to the Google references to the screencasting references and everything in between. So again, that is, I just put it in the chat. It is bit.ly/visual sound 031. And you'll see there is a huge table of contents of all the things on there already. And this normal text to the headings is how you would create those table of contents. So the next tip I have is Google Translate. A lot of people normally use Google Translate to copy and paste foreign languages so that they can understand what they're reading. But if you didn't know this, there is actually a microphone option on the bottom of the box. So rather than copy and paste text, you can speak. So if you're screen sharing and you do this, obviously I'm wearing a microphone right now as I'm presenting to you. So I would click on the microphone of Google Translate and I would talk. The same way that the closed captioning on my presentation, the captions would also automatically translate. You would see the English and the Spanish in this example. What I would say is if you're doing this in a Google Meet, I would highly recommend that you open share screen and not share share window and not share screen, because you're going to want to have your presentation and Google Translate both open so that way the translations are showing. If your students are in your classroom when you go back and you do have an English as a second language student, you could tell them to hit the microphone, demonstrate to them how it works, and that way if they're struggling to understand your directions, it will translate it in real time for them. Again, it is not perfect. It doesn't always get the grammatical stuff correct, but it is a great resource for having that foreign language discussion. It's also really good during parent teacher conferences when you have parents, because your students might be learning English, but the parents might be struggling a lot more since they're not in a school setting on a daily basis and learning those English language skills. So the next thing I want to talk about is Google Classroom integration. A lot of you, and I would assume if you came to a session on Google Tips You Forget, you're probably using Google Classroom right now. So what I wanted to talk about is the fact that Google Classroom does do some stuff automatically on the back end. When you create a new Google Classroom, it is going to create a calendar. Every time you put an assignment in Google Classroom with a due date, it creates a calendar event on the corresponding calendar. Your students actually will get a calendar that pops up. So as you can see in my sample image, my first calendar is my personal calendar, but then I have 3 classes that will also send to my calendar. That means that if I have my school account connected to my phone, every assignment will show on my calendar. If I go to calendar.google.com, everything will show on that one screen. It makes it really easy to just see everything in a calendar view rather than the feed of a Google Classroom view. The other thing that Google Classroom does automatically is it creates a folder for every class you attend. So if you, as the teacher, you will have folders for all of your classes, your students will also have a folder. It starts in the classroom folder and then it umbrellas down to the individual classes. Even at the end of the school year, if you archive the class, the folder remains in Google Drive. So you as the teacher can pull up work from previous years. Your students, if they go into their Google Drive and they're like, I know I had to write a resume for my history class. I really don't want to start again for my ELA class. They can go in and they could search their drive and type in resume, and they could find that document no matter what class it was from and what folder it was from. So it really does help with the organization because it happens automatically and it just creates that folder. George just said, can you move a folder from one class to another? So because these folders are automatically created, they're not going to be able to move. Okay, so I mean after the fact. Yes, George, so after the fact, if you were to come into Google Drive and click move the folder, it will move. You can put the files wherever you want. It might mess with the front end though. So if you take a student's file out of a folder that's shared to that student, the student might lose access. So if you're unaware of this, when you create documents in Google Drive, or in Google Classroom, I should say, the file belongs to the student. When the student hits submit, the ownership of that file transfers from the student to the teacher. Now, when the teacher hits return, the ownership goes back to the student. But if you never return your student's work, George, and you take it out of your folder and put it somewhere else, your student will lose their access to it. So I would be very cautious about just moving the documents. If anything, I would say copy the documents or create a shortcut to the document. In Google Drive, if you right click on a document, you will see an option to create a shortcut or create a copy. So rather than just move the file completely, I would recommend one of those other 2 options so that way it doesn't mess with the document's flow and the ownership of those documents. All right, so the next tip I have is something that a lot of teachers don't realize exists, and a lot of students don't realize this exists, and that is within the Google image search, there are advanced search options. So as you can see in the sample, I have a screenshot of the Google toolbar. And right after you do your search, there's a little option that pulls up that says tools. So when you go to that tools option, it's going to pull up these additional menus. The size menu lets you pick the size of the file. If you have ever found an image file that looks really good when it's tiny, but then you try to print it out on a document for your students, you can't read it, that has to do with the pixels. So if you come to the size, it's going to let you kind of find that file that's easier for your students. Colors, if you are going to be printing something for your student, it's really beneficial to just start black and white because, as you know, when you make photocopies, sometimes those colored images don't end up very clear on your tests. So if you're looking to, like, for example, label parts of a cell and you have a colored picture and you photocopy it and everything just blurs together, if you started as a black and white image, it's going to be easier to photocopy that. Transparent has to do with the background. So if you've ever put an image on a, for example, if you were to put an image here and it gets that white box around it, that's the transparent. That's anything that has no background. Usage rights has to do with copyright. So when I taught computer literacy in a high school, I made sure to talk about this a lot with my students. When you're a teacher, you kind of do get away with a little bit more in terms of copyright, mostly because people are not going to go after teachers, but it is still technically a copyright violation legally. I shouldn't even say technically, it is legally a copyright violation. So when you come here to use usage rights, you could find images that you have permission to reuse. If you were to do the image search directly in Google Docs and Google Slides, they actually will only provide you images that have Creative Commons, which is a copyright law allowing reuse of an image for non-commercial use. Non-commercial just means you're not making a profit off of it. If you post it to something like Teachers Pay Teachers, then you're profiting off of it, then a whole different ballgame. But if you're just using it for your students, anything that has Creative Commons is legally allowed for you to use. The last thing is type. So if you are, for an example, a primary school teacher, you might want these line drawings because you might want to find, it's basically like a coloring book page. So you give the students a line drawing of a map or a line drawing of the different letters or whatever you're teaching that day, and they could color it in while answering questions about it. So that's what line drawing is. Clip art, photos, faces, I think those kind of are self-explanatory. Animated would be your GIFs or your GIFs, depending on how you pronounce that G. But those are the advanced search engines of the Google image search. The other really, really cool function on Google image search that a lot of people don't know about is this camera right here. So let's say that your student found something in science class, like they found a bug, and they want to figure out what kind of bug it is. They could take a picture and then insert the picture to the search engine, and it's a reverse image search. So what will happen is when you put the picture in, Google will actually kind of look at the picture and find similar pictures. So that way it could pull up other stuff. I have tested this myself. I've put pictures of like the Eiffel Tower, Statue of Liberty. I've put pictures of bugs and stuff, and it does do it. It will find you other pictures, and then when you click on that other picture, you obviously see what it was labeled, so you can get more information about what you're looking at. So that is a really cool function. It's the reverse image lookup. So the next tip of things that you sometimes don't remember is in Google Meet. There are now 4 ways to start a Google Meet session. Number 1 is directly in Google Meet. So you go to meet.google.com and you just click start a session. Number 2 is in your Google Classroom. And in your Google Classroom, you can go to the settings option, which is that little gear in the top right corner, and you can turn on a permanent Google Meet link for your classroom. Option 3 is to create an event in Google Calendar, and you would just click conferencing online and it creates a Google Meet. You can then invite your students to that Google Meet through the calendar. The last way actually just started within the past week, and that's directly in Gmail. If you look at the left of Gmail, toward the bottom of the menu, you'll see an option that says start a Google Meet or join a Google Meet. So that again just started within the last week, but there are now 4 separate ways to get into a Google Meet call. So speaking about Gmail, a lot of you are probably getting an inbox currently filled with classroom emails. Students turning work in, you assigning an assignment, students asking questions, comments, anything. Every time something happens in classroom, you're getting an email alert. But if you're getting all those emails from Google Classroom, you might miss an important email from your principal or from a parent. So that's why filters in Gmail are a great feature to make sure you're using. So when you go into your Gmail, you're going to notice there's a search bar on the top that lets you search through old emails. And there's this tiny little arrow, and it's sometimes a little hard to see. But right on the top to the right of the search bar is a down arrow. And when you pull that down arrow, it gives you more advanced search features of your email, but it also gives you an option that says create a filter. So for example, if in the from column, I write at classroom.google.com, and then I click create a filter, it pulls up this next menu. And I can mark anything from classroom as read, and I could apply a label, for example, classroom. Now, when you apply labels, right under your draft folder, you'll start to see all your labels also lining up. And in this screenshot, you do see where I was talking about that new meet, because I took the screenshot yesterday, it's already there. But as you add these filters, you will start to see them all line up. And when you click on a filter, it will pull all the emails from that filter. Another great filter to set up is I used to have one from my principal. So anytime an email came in from my principal's email address, it was automatically labeled administrator. And I also had it set the color so that anything labeled administrator was turned red. That way, it immediately, when it was in my inbox, I spotted that red administrator mark and it let me know that that was an important email. If you are creating a filter, there's an option at the bottom that says apply to matching conversations. This means that it'll go back through your Gmail, your inbox, and through your archives, and it'll add that label to any previous email that matches that filter. So, for example, if you already have 100 emails from Classroom, it will add that label directly to those 100 emails without you having to go search and manually do that. Once you are satisfied with your settings, you click create the filter. And now any future email that comes from classroom.google.com is going to get that classroom label automatically. To change the color of the label, on the left toolbar, you would just right click on the label and there's an option that says color. When you select the color, in the corner over here, it'll change that little arrow to the color you set it to. And any email coming in will also have that color mark on it. So again, filters are really great and there's no limit to the number of filters. So you could, if you have all your students' email addresses, you could actually create a filter and call it student. And all of emails from your students will be labeled with the word student. Anything from colleagues would be labeled teachers or colleagues or whatever you choose to label it. So again, filters in Gmail are a great organizational tool to help you quickly go back and find emails and also to help you sort your inbox so you don't miss the important emails. The next tool I want to show you that most teachers don't realize exists is Google Fonts. It is fonts.google.com and it's a lot of fun because it's just point and click. There is no install, there's no download. So if you are making a lot of presentations and you don't want them to be boring, you can go in and find all of these fonts. If you're teaching, for example, this homemade apple, I love this one because it looks like correct cursive handwriting. So if you are still trying to get your students to learn that cursive handwriting, you can have your slides look like real handwriting. And there are also some non-cursive handwritings that look realistic. So don't feel like you have to use homemade apple. You can search through all of them. Press start 2P is kind of looks like that old-fashioned 16-bit video game. Henry Penny looks like a Harry Potter font. So obviously for copyright reasons, they couldn't call it Harry Potter. I did try to search for a Disney type font, but I could not find one. I am sure there is one somewhere. You just have to look through thousands and thousands of fonts because again, they're not going to just call it Disney. They're not going to call it Coca-Cola, but you can find all of these type of fonts to make your presentations a little more fun for your students and for yourself. There is also, I said I wasn't going to talk about extensions and add-ons. There is one called Unicorn Font that basically makes every letter a different color. I would not recommend showing that one to your students because they will go overboard with it, but it is there. All right, so the next feature that I want to show you that a lot of people don't realize exists is Google custom searches. And the link for this is on the bit.ly because it is a bit of a strange link to get to it. It's I'm trying to think all of a sudden. It's like search.withgoogle.com backslash. Again, it is in the bit.ly because it is a long link to start with. But when you go to this custom search, as you see, it says sites to search. So if you wanted to have your students do a research project, but you're teaching primary, so you want to kind of help guide them to good resources that they can be using, you can set this to sites to search and set it to scholastic.com, discovery.com, pbs.org, and only those websites will come back in the search results. So it really does help to limit the bad resources or the improper ones. If you're teaching high school, maybe you want to make sure they're not using Wikipedia, so you can set this to avoid Wikipedia. Side note, Wikipedia actually is considered a good resource now. And if you go to ALA or MLA or APA, sorry, I'm getting my acronyms all messed up. But if you go to their websites, they will actually have information about Wikipedia and the validity of it in searches. However, like I said, I know high school teachers are trying to avoid Wikipedia just so students don't get lazy and they learn how to truly do research. So these custom Google searches, once you create it, it will give you a custom link to your search engine. And that's what you would put on your Google Classroom for students to use only your search engine rather than Google as a whole. Google Takeout is a really good resource, especially if you're a high school teacher with seniors. Tell your seniors to do this before the school shuts off their accounts. It's takeout.google.com. And what it's going to do is it's going to create zip files of everything in their Google Drive. So this way, when your student goes off to college and they need a file from high school. Well, once they're out of high school and your school district shuts down their school district account, they won't have that access. If they do Google Takeout, they will get a zip file of everything in their drive. It's only going to be their drive. It's not going to be other files. I will just say that as a backend thing, your administrators could have shut Google Takeout off. So check it yourself before recommending it to students. And if it's not available, but you think it's a good resource, talk to your administrators and see if they would turn it on for your students and for yourself if you wanted to get your files as well. Google Science Journal is a really good feature, and I just looked at the clock. We are right now at 12 o'clock. I did go a little bit over. I apologize for that. Google's Science Journal is an app for your devices. And what it does is it actually turns your phone into a data collection device. It uses the sensors. So if you've ever played video games or 360 videos, you know that when you turn your phone, it recognizes the phone's moving. So it uses the gyroscope that's built into your phone. It uses the speaker. It uses the microphone. It uses all the sensors that your phone has, and it collects data. I have seen students use this in a science fair situation where they actually put their phone on like their arm using like one of those runner arm straps, and they can determine speed and velocity. And they use that to measure the differences between multiple students running or if obstacles slow a student down. So they can use the built-in sensors of their phone, and the Google Science Journal allows them to collect the data, and it graphs the data, shares it in Google Drive, and all of that type of stuff. On the Google Science Journal website, there are some pre-made activities that you as the teacher can look at and possibly use with your students. It has a search engine that will let you do half hour to over 2 hours, etc. Someone just asked if I will be sharing the recording of today's presentation. Yes, this recording will be uploaded to YouTube, hopefully, I would say by 2 o'clock today. Don't quote me on that though, because as you know, things come up. It will get on the YouTube channel and it will be added to the bit.ly that has all the resources. So that was it. Again, I did go a little bit over where I normally talk. So if you want to stay for question and answers, I am not going to leave right away. I do have office hours this afternoon, so you are more than welcome to come back for office hours as well. Thank you all for attending today's webinar and have a great afternoon. And I didn't mean to cut you off, Andy. Sorry.
Well, that's fine. I was just going to add, I know a number of you did join late. So if you could in the chat, enter your email address so we do have a way to follow up with you and record your attendance and know that you are here. So if you could do that, we would much appreciate it. And again, thank you all for attending.